The soles of his feet became bruised from constant pacing, back and forth from the hallway to the kitchen, a peek in the fridge, and back again. The tile had been cruel to his feet and the phone to his ear. It was 4 o'clock and he was finally off the telephone and began to ready himself for departure. The alarm had been set for 11 in the morning, but no feet touched the floor until 1:45. The past 3 weeks had been like this, unproductive, long. School was finished and he was unemployed. Bills meant nowhere near as much as they should, but concern and stress were far from scarce. What troubled him the most, perhaps, was his inability to create. He had been told often that he was a talented individual. At times he even believed it. But lately there had been no drive. He was uninspired, for his surroundings had made themselves gray and dull in his presence. He was insensitive, for love had left him, and he was confident of its unwillingness to return. He was unmotivated, for his necessities had been masquerading themselves as options. It was May, rainy, silent, and hungry. Music for the first time bored him, and he refused to test that boredom. He would have read the books that he had set aside for summer had his eyes and his mind been willing and capable of concentrating on even the titles, let alone the contents, but they instead shifted quickly and randomly from wall to wall, from thought to thought. He missed her, although he wasn't sure which her he missed. He needed her, although he doubted that she existed. Each week called itself a day, and he felt 50 as he sluggishly crept each of his 20-year-old legs into his pants. They were a light sort of army green, but the poor lighting in his apartment gave the illusion of a much darker shade. The socks he wore were the same as yesterday's, as was the shirt. He stood there in the middle of his room, staring blankly at his bed, reflecting on a parallel that his friend had drawn earlier between the process of making one's bed in the morning, only to undo it the same night, and striving to achieve something that will inadvertently surely be destroyed. He made it nonetheless. He scratched his head and discovered dandruff, wiped his chin, found ungroomed stubble. He would have been ashamed of himself if he had the energy. He would have hung himself had he even cared. But instead, life had reached such a point of unimportance that it wasn't even worth ending. His window to the world was his cordless phone, as it was his means of contacting those that consistently pretended to care about him, and his means of pretending to care about them. He was happy they were there. It was a satisfying system. All the shades in every window in the flat had been drawn, and he could barely find his shoes in the darkness that should not exist in one's apartment at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They were tan Converse low tops, cracked on the sides, torn in the back, crooked-tongued and reeking of cat piss. He was convinced that they still did the job, but they had retired behind his back, riddled with holes and promises of disease. His breath smelled, his tooth was broken. He would have masturbated, but he lusted nothing. He became slow, pale, greasy. The light hurt his eyes as he stepped outside and took longer than usual to adjust. The mailbox downstairs offered nothing but an electric bill and a letter to some lady named Leslie. He imagined she was a previous owner of his apartment who had failed to notify the post office of a changed address. Letters in her name came frequently, and he read them all. He wanted to meet her, maybe spit on her. He resented her for getting his hopes up whenever he'd opened his mailbox. He'd considered killing her. He made his way to his car. His tires looked low, hubcaps were missing. His car was gray, and he felt that was symbolic, but wished he was smart enough to know just what it symbolized. He crawled in and shut the door, finally muting that goddamn Blue Jay. The interior smelled of cat piss as well and was littered with cassettes and receipts. He leaned forward and rested his head on the steering wheel, wanted to throw up, but wasn't sure why. At 10:05 in the p.m., he awoke, still in his car, having not made it out of the parking lot. He wasn't upset by this, for he had forgotten where exactly he intended to go in the first place. He tasted sleep in his mouth and felt the imprint of the wheel on his right temple as he peeled off his head from the plastic. Locking up his car, he ascended to his apartment, where he resumed his slumber fully clothed. The next morning, his alarm rang loudly, promptly at 11 o'clock, but no feet touched the ground until 3:30 in the afternoon. He needed her badly.